Welcome to part two. And this part, before we start in Keyshot, just want to show you quickly, tile and textures and how you can create one. If you've never done that, there's a million tutorials on the internet for doing this, but I might as well just show it now for beginners maybe that don't know how to do it and couldn't be arsed going looking elsewhere. So I'm just going to do it really quickly and show you the procedure rather than try to get a perfectly tiled texture. So you can see here we've this metal here. So if I come up to filter, this is already tiled, and other and offset. You can see we've offset it here, but there's no visible seams. So that's an indicator that it's a tiled texture. Whereas and we have this blue kind of paint texture as well, which is also tiled. So say for instance what I did for the red metal, I'll just open the red metal. The red metal, all this was this metal texture, and then I just added a solid red layer in. I just added a solid red layer over that in whichever of the blend modes I chose for the look I wanted. Just to, you can see here, it just gives variation across the. This will be like our base kind of texture, and then we'll render it out with this texture to the body of the gun, and then we'll take that render and we'll adjust it in Photoshop then as we'll adjust that render pass layer in Photoshop, the duplicate of it, and give us that desaturated one that we're going to mix it with. So I'll come over to this, it's just a kind of a dirt plaster wall sort of. You don't have to use, it's another thing about texture, like you don't have to use the real world texture to texture what you're texturing. So say for instance you could use concrete as a base for your metal, or in this case this is like a plaster wall, a raw plaster wall. So I'm going to use this as dirt, because the dirt is only going to be sparingly applied in areas you're never going to see it up close. So you can kind of be flexible like that with your textures. Don't always think that you have to use the real world texture for the material that you're creating. So I'm just going to crop this out. I'm going to crop it out. I don't want all this kind of dark, obvious sort of variation in this, because it's going to be tiled, so it'll be very obvious then when you tile it across your model. So I'm just going to crop this, and I'm going to just make it 2K, so that'll be 2048, 2048. So I'll just come down here just till we're slightly over it, and I'll choose that area to crop. I'll crop that, and now I'll just go to image size, and I'll just change it to 2K. So the reason I went slightly over is so that we won't be stretching it. Sorry, I'll just turn off it's just constrained here. Sorry, I'll just turn off the constraint and change that to 2048. Yeah, so the reason you don't want to be scaling up your textures, you always want to be kind of scaling them down, so you're not losing any resolution by scaling them up. So now if I do the same thing here, go to filter, other, offset, you can see now very obvious seams here, which would be glaringly apparent when you tile this texture. So what you want to do is, there's different ways of doing this. There's all these different tools. There's the clone stamp, and then I think the healing brush, all these other content aware, all these other things. But you can try them out, or maybe you're familiar with Photoshop. I just use the clone stamp, and I'm just going to use. I'll just bring the size down. A kind of a not quite hard, not quite soft, because sometimes, depending on how close you're going to get to the texture, you'll either have hard edges or blurry soft edges where you clone out the texture. So you want to kind of choose the right brush for whatever you're doing. So we'll just stick with this brush here, and just press Alt in the region over here maybe, and then we'll just paint up here. So you can see now I've sampled this part here, so I don't really want to sample that. Now we'll just stick with that actually. So I'm just going to paint. I'll click another area down here. I can just paint, and just keep Alt clicking then for just to select a new area to clone from. So we'll try that out now. We go back to filter, offset, and you can see we still have this because these dark patchy areas. So usually you have to do this a couple of times. So I'll just clone out some of these patchy kind of, sorry, dark patchy areas, so they're not as, it's not as obvious. And you want to look out for things that are going to repeat, that you might end up inadvertently kind of repeating with your clone stamp. So I'll just quickly paint this out here and do the same thing again. And now we just have a little bit here, so just drop that down and just paint that sort of bit out there, and that's really obvious. Filter, offset, and now you can see there's no seams. There's no seams showing up. Now this isn't great texture. The resolution is it has harsh kind of lighting and things like that, you know. So it's not. It wouldn't be great for most things, but for this, for the dirt, it's not really going to matter that much. Another thing you can do is you can to even out the variation. It works more. It works better with grayscale images, but you can just duplicate that layer and come up to filter, other, high pass, and play around with the settings here, and just try to kind of even out the variation a bit, and then you can set that to soft light. It usually works better with depending on the texture, but a lot of the time for grayscale kind of images. But we'll just get rid of that layer again, and right, so I'm happy with this. So you can just save that then as we'll just save it as a JPEG, and we'll just call it Dortmund tiled. So now we have that as a tiling texture that we can apply over in Keyshot. So yeah, I just thought I'd add that in as well for any of the beginners out there that weren't sure how to tile textures. Alright, sure, I'll back in a second. Right, here we are in Keyshot, and I've just solid out this part here, and we're going to work on this materials for this part first, rather than overwhelming ourselves with the whole lot in one go. So as I said about the camera earlier on, we don't need to lock that until we're going to actually render. So at the moment, you know, we've free reign to just test out our materials and have a look from all angles. You could also just lock that and switch back to free camera, but it doesn't really matter until we're actually going to render. So a few things I want to do here. It depends now. There's a couple of different ways of rendering out your passes. You can use the preview view renderer, which is just the main kind of screen here, and you can just let it run. It's progressive and it'll clean up. The longer you leave it, the cleaner the result. And then you can use your print screen on your keyboard, or you can press P or the screenshot button down here. And what P or the screenshot button, it's going to save that snapshot of the screen to a folder there in your, I think it's in the Keyshot install, or in documents, maybe users documents, or else you can render, and you can just use the dedicated render settings. Set your output as you might do traditionally, set your file over to TIFF with transparency like I was talking about earlier on, set your resolution, all the rest of it, and then you have your different settings here for quality. Here's the passes, there's the clown pass I was talking about, region render. So I'm just going to close that down. So what you want to, one thing that confused me when I first started using Keyshot was annoying. You want to make sure your resolution here, whenever you set your resolution to here, if the aspect is locked, when you go to render, it'll be sort of it'll be taking its information from this here, so it's just something to bear in mind. You can set this up to your resolution that you're going to render to, and then when you go into the render settings, you won't have trouble, or you won't be confused or wondering why on earth it keeps won't let you type in the resolution you want to type in. So if you're going the preview route, you can just whack these up. So you can whack them up the top and just leave them there and let that settle, and let them settle and clean up. or if you're going to be rendering, you'll be setting this up within your render settings. So while we're setting up here, we can just doesn't make a huge difference. We'll set that back down. Can't even remember now what it was at. Yeah, so we'll just leave it there. See up here as well, cores. I have 12 cores on my machine here, so I usually leave it at 10. I haven't really noticed a huge difference. I'll only set it lower when I'm working between Zbrush and Keyshot kind of simultaneously. In this case we're not, because we're not really going to be jumping back and forth much once we have our models in, so it's not going to make a huge or we won't be doing any intensive kind of work in Zbrush. That's going to be affected because the cores are being hogged over here in Keyshot. Okay, so what I like to do is I like to change this from light and environment, which means whichever of these light environments you drag in, it's going to show up in the background. So I don't like that. Even though it'll be transparent in the render, I still don't like it. I like to have a solid background. So we'll set that to black, and that's pretty much all. You can turn off ground reflections because we won't be using them. That's pretty much it there. So next thing you can do is you can drag these in all the way through. You can, even while you're in between passes, you can keep changing your lighting. So once we get our material in place, we can change these around more. So as I say, I go into all this stuff in the two-part Keyshot kind of introduction I've already done. You'll see that on my channel there as well. So back to materials. So one thing to mention about materials, there's a huge amount of metals here. You can see them, huge amount. I don't really use many of them. Very odd time I might use one here for the eagle material, but generally, or you know, I might use the chromes or whatever, but generally I don't really use them. I find myself using these metallic paints. If you go into paint and then there's subcategories here, so I find myself using these a lot more. One metal that I do use and probably will use in this is if you go down to metals, old, this one here, steel ultra scratches, and maybe this I think that's metal ultra scratch. You might actually use that one for the eagle. So first thing is first, we're gonna just I'll go up to let me see, I'm gonna there's paint here as well, so I'll just close down these metals so I can see what the hell's going on, and just go to paint and just drag that on there for starters. And then if we right click on the material, edit material, it'll open up here in the material editor tab, and it'll show down here, these will be all your scene materials. So the first tab here, there's not many settings here in these Keyshot materials. Different materials have different amounts of settings. So the first one is property. So here's this gloss I was talking about, and the samples there. So this is our color, because we've no textures here, so it's just red, solid red, and this is our gloss. So at the moment you can see how glossy it is. That's the mirror reflection, or if roughness, this would be 0 roughness. So if I bring that down, you know, halfway, it starts to blur out those reflections, and they're not as mirror like. So I'm going to leave that, we'll say halfway, and then I'm not going to use this red. I'm going to just turn on our diffuse texture here, and I'll just go to where I have the, let me see, it's in textures, and we'll just grab our red metal here. So there's our red metal, and depending on which texture swatch you click on, it'll jump between the different settings here. So first things first is box map. Because we've no UVs, we would use UV coordinates if we did. Box map is going to be your best friend here in most cases, and I think the way Keyshot works is, I think it does triplanar projections, blended kind of box map and projections, which means you rarely see seams across the different axes or the different. So a box map is just, it's 6 planar projections, top, bottom, left, right, front, back. So you know, traditionally they'll smear across the seams, and they'll be visible, noticeable, depending on the texture you're using. So say if it was a an obvious pattern like a checker pattern or something, you'd see that, you know. But I'm not too sure. I think Keyshot might use triplanar projection, which means it's blending where those seams meet. But someone can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that's just the feeling I get. But so there's our diffuse texture in place, and you know, we could use this same map. In fact, we'll just, as an example, we'll just put this in the bump slot. You know, we could use that there and whop up the bump height, but because I created this texture using this metal, remember I showed in the Photoshop bit where it was set in a blend mode on top of a solid layer. That's how I created this, so we can use this as the bump map, and now you can see it's much more noticeable. So that's just to give, you know, bump maps are quite important to render out from Keyshot, because or just to render out from any render. Your bump map is going to change the reflections as they hit your surface, to give more variation and more interesting reflections. So they're very, very important to use. So here you have your heights, or your different settings here. So with bump height, self-explanatory. Sync here, if your textures are the same, based on the same kind of texture, you want to leave sync on, so when you tile them, they're going to tile together automatically. And then repeat is on, obviously, if it's going to be if you're going to tile. At the moment it isn't tiling, but I can bring the scale up here, and you can see the texture is a lot bigger on the surface, visibly bigger, and that's going to be synced in with our color here. You can see the scale also went up on the color map. It's the same. So you can adjust, you know, the offsets and the angles and everything. If you're not happy with the placement, or you can go in here to mapping tool, and you can actually move it around in screen space, which can be quite handy as well. So on the refraction index as well, the higher that is, this is generally going to be at a pretty physically correct level. The higher you go with that, the stronger your reflections. So this is using energy conservation, as most physical renderers do. So the more reflection you have, the less of a diffuse component will be visible in the material, because all the light is being reflected, so you're not going to see the diffuse. Think of a chrome, you know. So that's at a ridiculously high level there, so we're just going to set that back to the default to 1.5, and you can play around with these settings till you get something you're happy with. And just this blend with color, you can just I think it's just a 50-50 mix of whichever color is in this swatch here. So with that all said, you know, we can come down here and increase our bump. Or what we could do is we could change that bump altogether, so that it isn't, we could use a different bump. So let's say, for instance, because this is varying shades of grey with very little contrast, you know, it's kind of a continuous bump over the surface. So there's one in here that I think it's called patchy. This patchy one here, see, this is highly contrasted blacks and whites. So if I add that into the bump now, you can see, because I have this bump set really high, it's at a crazy level now for that, because that's black and white and highly contrasted. So it's going to have much more of an effect than the mid-tone kind of greys with very little contrast. So I'll set that back to the default of 1, and even that's way too strong. So we'll say 0.5, and it's getting a bit more sort of realistic there. So if we have a look at this, you know, you can see it looks like quite a thick layer of paint. So we want to sort of mimic that here in our texture. And remember, we're going to be using a universal bright kind of metal layer underneath everything, so when we chip away using the masks in Photoshop, we're going to reveal that underneath. So I'm not happy with that, so I'm just going to turn off sync now, because these are different textures, and I'm just going to raise the scale up and maybe drop the bump height down a bit more. Let's see what that looks like. Just let that clean up a few seconds. Maybe, sorry, go to the settings. Shadow quality. Not sure, I can't remember what the default is for that. Not to worry. So our bump height here is still. Oh yeah, one other thing to mention: you check this box if you're going to use a normal map. Now, Keyshot actually does. I'm just going to drop that bump down a bit more because it's still way too high. Keyshot does come, if you come over here to the texture tab, it does come with a load of textures already installed. So you won't, if you're using Keyshot 5, you won't have all these. I copied, Keyshot 5 doesn't have as many as Keyshot 4 had, so I just copied all the ones from Keyshot 4 over to 5. But it's broken up into categories here, you know, bump maps, and you have all your normal maps and good old fashioned bump maps as well, grayscale bump maps. But you can chop and change, so you can use these for bump maps or specular maps as well. And then you just have different, these are all just the different maps. And what opacity map will do, it'll give you an opacity cutout in Keyshot, so it actually gives nice results. You could, so I'll just say, for instance, I'll just drop this in here. You know, you can see now that wherever it's black, it's going to cut away that geometry, or give the illusion that the geometry is cut away. And you can even see reflections on the inside here, as if it really, the model really were like that, you know. So I'll just turn that off. And at the moment, I might just make this a bit darker, so we can also use these settings down here. You can just darken up that red a bit. We could also do this in Photoshop, but just to show you that those settings are there as well if you want to make use of them. And we go back to properties, and that is pretty much the basics of setting up your materials in Keyshot. There's not a huge amount of settings, which can be a nice breakaway from some other renders. Yeah, so we'll move on to the next piece now, and we can keep tweaking. We can keep tweaking as we go. You know, this isn't the environment that I want to use, so don't just leave one environment on and keep on tweaking your material, not be happy, keep tweaking, and then drag another environment in and realize that it's completely not the way you thought it would be. So it's nearly a good idea to almost settle on a, you know, an environment that you might use for your final render. So you also won't have all these. You'll have a few of them alright by default, but I've all my extra ones added in, and you can just go to sorry, I think that's off screen, your users documents Keyshot folder in there, and you can just throw in whatever HDRIs you like. So let me see, like this Paris one, but we won't use that. I'm just gonna have a quick look, see which one I want to use. Try that road one. So I might stick with that one for the moment. I can always do this off camera. I'll use the good old building probe. Yeah, I'm gonna go with this one for setting up. I've sometimes you find yourself coming back to favorites. So yeah, we'll leave that material there for the moment now, and we'll jump back to Zbrush, and I'm just going to unsolo, and We'll just bring everything across now, because most of these are going to have the same metal material, so there's only, there's a handful of materials. But if you have a much larger project with maybe 20 different materials, it's maybe a good idea to just bring them in one at a time. But you can also just you can show and hide within Keyshots, so maybe you're better off doing that. So for instance, you can just right click and say show only, and that'll the same as soloing in Zbrush, and then you can just right click and show all parts. Right, so I'm just going to choose one of these. Maybe I might choose the barrel and show only, and now we'll set up our material for this. So back to materials, and let's see, you can see here now down in the scene materials, these are all different ZBrush materials that were brought over, but as we overwrite these, they'll disappear from this, because this is the scene list of materials. Right, so I'm going to choose our metal here, so metallic paint here, metallic paint, and might choose, or sorry, we did say we might use this one down here, the old this ultra scratched. You can see here that materials automatically come up in the material editor, and that it's already set up with a color and bump map. It's one of the presets. You can save materials as well that you make. You can create them and then say save the library, and they'll pop in over here or into a folder that you specify. So we'll go with that one, and just going to show all parts. And if you keep dragging from here onto these objects, then it'll keep on creating more materials down here, and you'll have to adjust them all individually. A quicker way to do that is just to right click, copy material, right click, and then just say paste linked material. So materials in Keyshot can be linked and unlinked, and you can link them from the right click and unlink them, or you can come up here to scene and then just select whichever, and you have you can unlink, edit, or unlink materials, or you can just select everything and unlink them all. So that's linking and unlinking. So I'll just we're just going to paste this over now to so paste linked, paste linked. We'll just keep going here, and then when we change that one, it's like it's instancing it, obviously, almost, because it's linked. So when they're all linked together, you can change one and it'll change them all. And we want to paste this as a linked as well, and this part in the bottom, paste link material, and that's all the ones that we want for that. And for the front part here, we might see what else we can use there. I'll just check this reference so you can see it's we could even just paint over that in Photoshop to give it a bit of variation, or we can just we might do a pass with a we'll just do I'll keep it the same, and we can worry about that in Photoshop. So you'll know how to render passes, so you can do it yourself then if you want to render an extra pass. So I'll just paste that to there, and now we want to go back to paint again. So I just want to is there paste? Yeah, we can just copy this. We can copy this material and then paste it, but don't paste it link, just paste material. And now if we edit this material and we come into textures, and we'll just select this blue painted texture, so that'll just apply that blue instead of the red, and we'll paste it onto this as well, onto the skull. Sorry, you want to copy this one, copy material and paste, and just don't paste it linked. So or sorry, actually do paste it linked, because these are going to be the same. So copy material and paste link material. You can see here this is updating the material, the scene materials are updating here. Yeah, just this last one here as well. So copy and paste linked material, and now we want to maybe choose, we maybe drag this one onto the eagle, and if we come up to let me see, come up to plastic, I'll just find plastics, or paint even, we could go with gloss paint, maybe choose this orange one. I also have you also have plastics here, different types of plastics, so that's like kind of a semi-transparent plastic, hard, molded, you know, different types of plastic, soft, so soft basically it's just very blurred, sort of a reflection, and you can play around with all them as you like. So that's pretty much these basic materials set up. So we're going to want to play with them a bit now before we spit out the final render for this particular pass. So before we do that, I'm just going to save the scene. Right, if we right click on this metal here, we can maybe adjust some of the settings here if we're not happy with it. So as I say, you can do this in Photoshop as well, but let's say we want to make it a bit darker, and maybe raise the contrast, because it's the base map here is it's quite low contrast. It's kind of mid shades of grey. Or you could even come in, we could even change this out for any of these ones here. I'll just have a look, see what's here. Scratch one. Might just try this one. Maybe this one. It's hard to tell. Just let that clean up a little bit first, and I'm going to drag that material yeah, it doesn't look too bad, and maybe use that same one for the bump. See what that looks like. Okay, one other material I forgot to put on here was the little wax seal, so we can come down to translucent, and we can pick any of these and then adjust them. So it doesn't really matter here, we'll just maybe pick this one, low translucency, apply that, and it'll automatically come up over here, and then we just change it to red, and subsurface color, I could just make that a kind of a dark red, and leave the translucency at 1. Maybe just darken this up a bit, maybe desaturate it a little bit. Yeah, we'll go with that. And this, we might put a texture onto this material here, so you can also just double click here in the scene material, and we might just put a yeah, we can, what we can do is we can just pick any of these materials here, and then use that blend. You can blend it then with the orange and sort of get that, so it's not as brand new pristine looking. You can see here we can blend it, the same as what I did here by creating that map in Photoshop. You can just do the same thing here, you know, by blending the solid color over this grayscale image. So we might just try a few different scenes here, or a few different environments, and play around until we're happy. You know, there's some crazy ones you could put in. There's also, these are all these, obviously the environment kind of lighting. You also have these studio lighting setups as well, almost like 3-point lights, because they're spherical, so you can think of it like 2 and 3-point light setups. So depending on your lighting, you know, it's going to drastically change the look of your image. So the best thing you can do is just experiment. You can also edit these over here, whichever one's active. You can edit it here. I'm not going to go into that. I do it in one of the other videos, the Keyshot videos, so I won't go into it here now. But you can remember, you can drop in all your own ones. So you can see here the bump, you know, depending on which one you have, bumps and reflections are, you know, drastically kind of changed. So just keep messing around, and I'm not going to keep on doing this and boring people to tears. We're just gonna I'll just settle on one, and then we'll move along and render out our passes. Right, so once you've you know, I'm just going to settle on this lighting for the moment, and just keep messing about here with these materials. So I'll just stick that patchy back on, and I'm gonna pause the video, and I'm gonna keep setting up these materials using exactly the same things I've been doing up to now, and then I'm gonna set up my camera then, and I'm gonna lock the camera to, you know, wherever I'm happy with. So choose your angle, and might just do it from from the side a little bit. Yeah, so don't think this is going to be your final image, obviously, because we're going to be doing all these different passes and overlaying them and painting over them and all the rest of it. So I'm not happy with this metal at all, so I just want to have a quick look here at that bump is way too high. Or actually, we might just bring the gloss down a bit more and drop that bump down to 0.2. And what we can do is we can use, you know, the recessed parts of this as kind of a template almost to paint in some of those, paint the chips in and reveal the material underneath. So yeah, so that's as I say, I'm going to render off this. I'm going to pause it and set this up a bit more till I'm happy with this, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to render out the pass, and then we'll render the rest of the passes as well. Alright, I'll be back in a sec. Right, so I have my materials in place here, and let's just say I'm happy with this, even though nobody ever is. Everyone just wants to tweak, but we have to stop somewhere. Alright, and so I have this in place, have my camera locked off, and in the settings here I have my resolution, so I'm just going to render this in half HD. You know, I would never usually render that as a final kind of image, you know, for whatever portfolio kind of piece or whatever, but for this it doesn't really matter. It's just, this is just for the tutorial. So you can set your resolution there and lock the aspect. So we're happy with all that, happy with our materials, happy with our lighting. We've our resolution set, we've our camera locked off, and now we up to the render, drop down, and we can open up the render settings. So first things first, output. We'll just name this as we'll just call this beauty pass, and we'll try and spell it correctly. A-U-T-Y, spell that correctly, and then we'll go to, you can see here, it'll default to this folder. So I just want to go to wherever my project is, RDK Bolter, and we'll just make a new folder. And we'll just call this passes, and save it in there. So I'll be saving in passes. So I'm going to save in there. I'm going to save as a TIFF with the alpha channel. Have a resolution set, and I'm going to set it down to maximum cores. And you can click on use real-time settings if you want to just use the preview settings in your render. Come across the quality. Now these are the different options you have. So I used to just use maximum time, so I'd set it to maybe 15 minutes, and then it'll just brute force the render, and you don't have to set anything else. You can put it on, you know, maximum samples, and then you can render by samples. And advanced control will bring you back to these other settings, but you know, maximum time, it just means you don't have to set anything else up. So you can set this to 15 minutes, and then you can head off and whatever, make a cup of tea or have your dinner, whatever you want to do. Do a few laps at the park on a unicycle, whatever you want to do. But you know, then in 15 minutes you're ready to roll. And then if you do come back after 15 minutes and it's not giving you the result you want, if it hasn't cleared up all the noise, mostly in the shadowed areas, or if you have it translucent like a skin shader, and you can always just whop it up, then you've only lost 15 minutes, no big deal. So that's what I'm going to do here. But the other settings, these advanced ones, you know, if you've GI turned on over here, you can set your GI samples. These are just your samples, bounces. So many times the light's going to bounce around the scene. And the aliasing, yeah, you know what that is. If you've depth of field or caustics turned on, this is the sampling for that. This is the shadow sampling. Sharp shadows and sharp, usually turn them off. Cache the global illumination. So you want to make sure you have clown pass enabled, and we'll see what that is later on in Photoshop, but just make sure to have that enabled. It's one of the handiest passes you'll get from here, and pretty essential to what we're going to be doing. Right, so we have our file set up, our output, and we're going to leave this at maximum time, and what do we say, 15 minutes, and everything else is ready to go. So just click render, and now it's going to start cleaning up the image. You'll see up the top here, it'll give you a percentage down the bottom here as well, how long it's taken, and it's just going to clean up progressively until it reaches that 15-minute mark, and then bang, it's going to stop. You could also always set this, you could set this to 10 hours and then just come in and just you know, pause your render and save it. So it doesn't really matter, you don't have to set it to a time limit. You can set it to a ridiculous limit and then just choose when you want to stop it. So I'm going to pause it here while this is rendering, and I'll come back when it's rendered. Alright. Right, so here's it's finished rendering now. Here's the final render, and here's the clown pass I was talking about earlier on. So you can see what it's done here. It's broken up the different objects based on their materials and just created a kind of a material ID mat. So we can use this to our advantage. Just have it as a hidden layer in Photoshop, and then we can use the magic wand tool to select regions for masking. So that's the clown pass. So what we're going to do now is that's our main beauty pass. So we can take, you know, that pass in Photoshop, duplicate it, and using our masking, and we can duplicate layers and change these into the variations we talked about earlier on in the first part. So the next thing to do now, I'm just going to bring this back up here again. So there's our red warm metal, our blue warm metal, our scratched metal, our scratched brass, and our red wax. And then we just have this orange cable that we didn't have in here in the start. Now, so past this, we've got red metal, blue metal, dark metal. Now we're going to need, all we need now is our dirt. The AO and the rim light, I have separate kind of quick tip tutorials on them there on my YouTube channel. You can have a look at them. It tells you exactly how to render these out, so I'm not going to go over here again. We have our clown pass and we have our alpha map because we saved to a TIFF. So what we're going to do next is the dirt. So we just come up to materials, and I'm just going to select well, it doesn't really matter here. I'm just going to choose diffuse, and I'm going to turn off these, both of these, and we're going to set the diffuse. It doesn't really matter because I'm going to be putting our dirt into it. So I'll just double click on this, and we'll select our tiled dirt. So if we select that, it can be applied to that because at the moment that's the material we chose, but it doesn't really matter for this. So maybe first, before doing that, I'm just going to back up a bit, and I'm going to save this, save it again just before I start messing with material, so if anything goes wrong we can always pull this scene back. So I'll just do that again. It's on diffuse, and we'll turn off the bump, and we'll select our dirt, and now with the dirt selected we can go to scene and materials, and just drag this dirt and just drop it at the very top of the stack onto models, and that'll it'll go over everything. So these are all going to be linked again now. So the reason we use the diffuse material, because dirt doesn't really have much visible kind of specularity. Well, at least at a microscopic level obviously it does, but it doesn't really have a to the human eye. So back to material, and for the bump, we're just going to drop this in for the bump as well. We could have created a grayscale bump map in Photoshop. In fact, we might actually just do that really quickly. So I'm just going to Control U and just drop the saturation down, and Control L, and we'll just crush the blacks and whites a bit and get a kind of a mid-grey, and we don't want that too extreme. And then we'll just save this as just save it as a JPEG. Sorry, as a JPEG, and we'll just call it. Sorry, my mouse is going a bit weird. We'll just call it tiled bump, and that'll do us for what we're doing. So we'll just select that again now. And now it was showing up when it was the color map was the bump, but it's showing up that little bit more now. And I've just moved the camera, and that's a perfect example of why you want to lock the camera and save your scene. So I'm going to just perfect example. I'm going to reopen that scene and discard the changes. Just let that load again. And first things first, so good example of both saving your scene and making sure to lock your camera. Right, with that done now, we'll go back and set this up again. So we'll just go to scene, materials down here, and it doesn't really matter which one. Just drag any of them up onto models and edit that material now, and do the same thing. Change it to diffuse, and select the dirt and the dirt bump. Now back to properties, and we still have blend with color on, so we'll turn that off and get back to where we were a few minutes ago. See, diffuse doesn't have any specular component. Right, so we might want to the scale is very low, maybe bring the scale up. I had that set down low because this was the orange kind of wire texture. So at the moment as well, it's very bright. So we'll change that in Photoshop as well. and it might just bring the scale up and just make sure that they're synced there. We go with that. We can render this off, and we can always change this in Photoshop. So I'm going to go with this. So the bump might be a little bit too heavy, so we go into bump, and yeah, I set to 1. We'll put it down maybe to 0.2. It depends on what sort of dirt you're looking for, be it caked on sort of muck or dust. Dust is obviously going to have practically 0 bump, so I'll bring that down again even more, like 1. And I'm going to render this off. You can mess about there with the bump depending on what you want, and you can change the brightness and contrast, or you can just do it in Photoshop. So I'll pause this again, and I'll come back down when it's finished rendering. Right, with the door pass rendered now, we're going to move on and just decide on which metal we want to use here as the base layer. So you know, it's entirely up to you. You can add as many passes as you like. This is just kind of giving you an idea of what passes you might want to grab and how to kind of work with them. But you can, you can really use anything here, anything at all that fits your needs. So we're just going to choose. I'm going to use as I was saying earlier, I like to use the metallic paint a lot of the time, so we might maybe use this one and just drag it up to the top of the tray there, and I think we'll go with that one. So I'm going to render this pass out now. Maybe something a little bit darker. Right, well I'll render this one out then, and I'm going to use this one. You're not going to see much of this. It's only going to be scratched off here on corners and things like that. It's only going to be partly sort of revealed. So maybe we'll just actually what we'll do is maybe put some just put some textures in it just to kind of break it up a bit. So maybe let's see what this is like in the diffuse. Maybe I'll drop the clear coat down. And the metallic paint is like a 2-layered kind of a shader, like a car paint kind of shader. So you have your blurry sort of reflective metal as the base kind of layer, and then you have a clear coat, like a lacquer kind of a 100% or defaults to 100% reflective, sharp reflections. So maybe we'll stick something in the bump as well. Let me see. Might just galvanized. We might just put this galvanized in here. Whenever you apply a normal map, just make sure to turn on normal map down here. Just check that. Maybe drop the scale. Or raise it up. Maybe it's too small. Yeah, it's hardly going to be noticed, but it's just every little bit helps just to give an extra bit of variation, you know. Now I'm not happy with this over here, so that's no big thing, you know. We can always just change our lighting as we see fit. So maybe we might prefer this, and now you can see the difference here because there's not as much direct light shining on it. We can see the bump, how strong that bump is and how big the scale is. So it's another thing to bear in mind with just when applying textures and things, you know. Test out different, as I said at the start, just test out different lighting scenarios. We might actually just take this as a pass in itself that we can use elsewhere. I'll just change Let me see, I'll change the bump maybe. Yeah, that's not really a very it doesn't really make much sense, that bump there, so I might just change it to maybe this rusted one here instead, and drop this way down 0.2. No, maybe I'll use one of these. Let me see. Let me see. Well, I might try this one here. And just get a strange kind of, I don't know what the hell's going on there. Oh yeah, sorry. Normal map is turned on. Just make sure to tick and untick that. And our bump is still very high. So 0.1. And yes, I think I will. Let me see. Change this altogether. Something a bit more interesting. We got down here, maybe scratch 1. And just turn off sync. And I'll bring the scale up or down. Hard to see. Maybe this one. I'm just kind of looking for you know, a bit of variation, a bit something interesting in the pattern that we can use to our advantage. Yeah, I think I'm gonna go with this. Let me see. I'll maybe change this over. We'll go with this, yeah, because it's only going to be revealed in places, so this has a different bump, so again it adds to variation. So I'm going to render this off and back in a second again. Just make sure when you're rendering your pass, I forgot to mention, every time for whatever reason this defaults back here to the Keyshot folder, so you can't change that, but I never do, because every project's in a different folder, so just bear that in mind. Every time you're rendering, you're going to have to go back and you know, if you want to do it for each project, you can change that in the settings. So I'm not going to worry about it too much, so just make sure that. Just one thing I forgot to mention. Right, now that I have that rendered, I'm gonna end the video here now, and all I'm gonna do is just render a couple more passes off, and right, the very last pass we're gonna need is the Caliban text here that's on the magazine. So if you just right click on the magazine, show only, right click again, and we'll unlink that material, and then right click again and edit material. And now we just come into the texture tab, double click the bump, and I'll select this pre-made bump texture. So we can use the mapping tool here to we can either use the gizmo, or we can click here, position, and then drag it around in screen space. So the first thing I'm going to do here is bring the bump height, because it's white on black. In a bump map, white usually pushes up and black goes in, so we want to invert that, so we can just bring that to minus, and I'm just going to bring it up higher than it needs to be, just so we can see it clearly, and rotate it here, and I just want to turn off repeat, and I'm going to bring it across, so there's just a bit of messing about here to get it into position. So we might just planar X, Y, I'll just mess around with some of these until there's going to be a little bit of messing about here to get it correct. So repeat is off, I can move it down, and I'm going to scale it down, because if it bleeds over the edge, it's going to stretch across the edge because it's on box map. So we can position it by hand here. and it just needs to be flipped horizontally. And now I just want to see if one of these will work. No, I'll leave it on box again. And it's resetting there. Okay, so back to the position tool and position. I'll just move it down again and rotate it. Looks like the rotation axis has gone all messed up. So I'll try that one more time. Back to box. And I don't know why the rotation axis is kind of gone crazy. It doesn't usually happen. You can always just use this here, the angle, just to get into position, and I'm going to scale it down a bit more. And I don't know why it shouldn't be repeating like that. Scale it down some more. Sorry, yeah, that was just the X scale, so I'll just come to 0.5 on X and 0.5 on Y. And position it again. I can probably bring that up to 0.9 and rotate it slightly. Just a bit finicky to kind of, I don't think that's a word outside of Ireland, but there you go. So I'm just going to play around a bit more with this and get into position. Alright, after a bit of messing, it turns out it was on planar X and this position. We can properly, it's not box map, so it's not stretching, or it's not being projected onto these other sides. So we can just rotate it back around there and flip that horizontally again. And now just move it slightly, and that's pretty good there. I'll probably change this to 0.9 again and move it slightly again, and maybe a tiny bit of rotation, just a tiny bit. There, that'll do us. And finally we can reduce the bump just enough to see it, but not enough that the reflections are overpowering it. So that's pretty good there. We'll say done, and now you can just we'll just render this as a pass, and then we can just make a selection of this part and overlay that then in Photoshop. So I'm just going to render that and save it out, and then the next, and that's going to be the end of this part, and then we'll move into part 3 next and start compositing and paint over in Photoshop. Alright then, cheers, thanks, good luck.